Hi, my name's David Lombardi, and I'm a consulting systems engineer for Meraki, based out of Melbourne, Australia. And today, I'm going to be talking about delivering an intent-based network with Cisco Meraki. This is the agenda that we're covering today. We're going to start off with the intent-based networking framework. And the idea is to give you a little bit of a refresher to help you understand what intent-based networking is and what does it mean to your business. We're also going to talk about simplicity and how that applies to intent-based networking, specifically with Cisco Meraki and how Cisco Meraki can help simplify networks. Security is important to everything that we do with intent-based networking. So we're also going to cover the security aspects that are ingrained with that networking that's part of the solution. Also, to feed back, to provide insights into what's happening with intent-based networking, we're going to talk about assurance with Cisco Meraki as well. And lastly, we're going to cover some of the integration work that's been happening with Cisco DNA Center, with Meraki and Catalyst. But before I start, I wanted to give you a bit of an idea of my intent-based networking journey and where I started. You'll see from the pictures that are in this slide here that intent-based networking back over 10 years ago was something that was kind of different. We used to manage lots of devices, and typically we would manage them individually. And when we did that, we'd have lots of windows open, we'd be pushing config to those devices through all those terminal or SSH windows. And if we wanted to provision a device out in the field, we'd have to go up, connect into it with a console cable, use TFTP or some other tool of deploying to deploy the firmware, and then that's how we'd bring that device up. Along the way, we learned that there were some quicker ways we could do this. And so I started some scripting. Some of it was Bash, some of it was Perl. And this was a way of me being able to automate some of the configuration that we would typically do in the environment, something that was normally very complex to achieve, but using scripting was a way that I could automate that across a large number of devices without having to go and manually touch each one as I started. So this is my view when I was a network administrator, but we've come a long way since then. So let's have a look at how intent-based networking has changed. The intent-based networking framework is really interesting in the fact that it has three main elements that encompass it. The first one is about translation. How do we take the goals that the business is trying to achieve and translate them into some form of network config so that they can be deployed on the devices? That's really the first main driver for intent-based networking. Secondly, we also then want to deploy that configuration on those devices. And so we need a means of deploying across a large number of devices that's automated, but also that validates that that configuration has been applied successfully. As part of that policy, we don't just want to push the configuration that enables what we want, but we want security enabled as part of that. And again, if you look at my example of how I used to do things back in the day, there were some examples of how we would push those types of deployments out, and they might be remote via an SSH connection, sometimes even via a web UI. And then later, APIs became something that people would leverage. And protocols like netconf and Yang, as an example, would be a way to deploy that. So APIs and programmability are key to intent-based networking as well, and that's something that we'll talk about as we go through the presentation today. Lastly, we want to feed the insurance back to the business. So now that I've deployed those configurations out to my devices, how do I check that those devices are working as I expect them to? And also, how do I check that users are getting the experience that I want them to? And so that's where insights become critical to closing the loop when we talk about intent-based networking. Cisco Meraki has three guiding principles around what we're trying to achieve with regards to networking. The first is around simplicity. How do we make it really easy for people to take network configuration and deploy it in their environment? And how do we do that in a way that's automated, where we don't need all of the tools that we used to use to be able to do that? And so simplicity is a real highlight and one of the reasons why many customers choose Meraki. Secondly, there's the dashboard. And the idea behind the dashboard is that that should be the single pane of management from a Meraki perspective for all of the devices that you have in your network. And dashboard allows us to provide those automation capabilities, but it also allows us to see what's happening in the environment. And for the most part, everything from a day-to-day operational perspective should be done from within dashboard. But we know that there are some contingencies, or there are some exceptions to that rule. And some exceptions might be, well, what if I want to leverage an API capability and I want to be able to pull data out of my network or use that to reiterate across a number of elements in my network and make configuration changes? And that's where Meraki Dashboard is developer ready. And a lot of what you see today from a dashboard demo perspective, and also that I talk about in the slides, has an API available for you or your business to leverage to be able to do those tasks. So when I look at those guiding principles, it's really easy to see how that aligns to an intent-based networking infrastructure. And that is that we take that simplicity and we translate those rules into configuration on the Meraki Dashboard side. Meraki Dashboard allows us to push those deployment examples or configuration examples down to our networking devices. And this gives us operational efficiency, what we see on the left-hand side of this slide. The ability to automate, the ability to see what's happening in our network, that's all intent-based, right? We're expressing intent, we're deploying it, and then we're getting a feedback loop in terms of what's happening. But we can also create great business intelligence on the right-hand side. And so by leveraging additional elements that are built into Meraki and APIs, we can pull out information, such as location analytics as an example, to understand what people are doing in our particular environment. And so this is what intent-based networking with Meraki looks like. And a key point to note is this applies to all of the products that you see here at the bottom of the screen, including our newly released MG Cellular Gateway. All right, let's go back a little bit and start with simplicity, and I'll give you some examples of how Meraki has simplified networking from an intent-based perspective. Again, when I talk to customers today, the most common reason they talk about for choosing Meraki is that simplicity. It's that ability for them to do the typical day-to-day tasks that they would normally do, and whether that's deploying networks or operating, managing, even troubleshooting, that simplicity is inherent in Meraki Dashboard, and it really allows them to be able to focus on more important tasks. And that's really what Meraki Dashboard is trying to achieve. The cloud isn't the means with which it does that. That's just the vehicle. That's just the method for us to get great scale and to be able to automate. But really, it's that simplicity. It's that ability to allow administrators to configure what are typically complex tasks really quickly in a couple of clicks and get efficiencies back. And what that allows is that allows the network administrator to stop focusing on the day-to-day running of the business, which they typically would take 60 to 80% up of their time. It allows them to look at what's next for the business. What are some areas that I can focus on that can help really drive value? And that's why customers typically choose Meraki. The dashboard, for those that haven't seen it, is really intuitive and it provides great visibility across the network. We can see who the users are in the network, what device they're connecting with, where they are from an access point perspective or a switch port. We can also see what applications they're consuming. And all of this gives us great feedback in terms of who are the users on our network, how are they using it, and what are they doing. And built on top of this is those automation and troubleshooting tools that I spoke earlier. So the dashboard is a key element and very unique to Meraki in terms of how we deliver intent-based networking. And of course, it goes without saying, but the cloud increases efficiency. And the reason for this is simple. It's really easy to scale. You as a customer don't have to worry about the cloud. You simply deploy your equipment and Meraki looks after the cloud as a SaaS offering for you. Meraki keeps the cloud up to date. It's always on, constantly pushing new updates out from a cloud perspective. So you've got increased value in your investment with Meraki. And it also means that we're able to reduce those operational costs through providing that automation platform in the cloud. And that's a key thing that Meraki offers as a value proposition. Let's jump quickly into a dashboard demo and have a look at some of that simplicity that Meraki can provide across visibility and across automation of configuration. Here we have a network, and you can see immediately that I can see all of the devices on that network, how they're connected, if they're connected to a switch port. I can see things like their usage for the last day. I've also got some client fingerprinting available here as well. If I want to, I can click into a particular device on this network, and I'm going to click onto a wireless user. And what's really cool about this is now I'm going to get visibility directly from that wireless user's perspective. So here I can see what access point they're connected to, who the user is that they're logging in with, and also some other details like their location on a map. I'm also able to get an end-to-end path view, and this is something new that we've just recently added, with wireless health, and I'll touch on this a little bit later, but you can see I've got an end-to-end path view of that user in the environment. And so I can mouse over these particular points in the network to get an understanding of, is the network performing well? As an example, if I was going to see packet drops here, or if I saw packet drops here, I would know that there could be an issue with this particular user. I'm also getting a view of wireless health for the user. And again, that's something I'm going to talk about later, so I'll gloss over that for now. But I can also see all the applications that user is consuming on the network. And if I expand that list out, you'll see the applications they're consuming and how much. All right, that's pretty cool. Visibility is great. This is something that a lot of administrators today lack, but we provide natively in Meraki Dashboard. Let's have a look at how easy it is to configure site-to-site VPN, something that's typically a configuration task. If I wanted to spin site-to-site VPN up for this site, it's pretty simple. I'm going to put it in spoke mode. I'm going to select from a drop-down list a hub, one or two, and then I'm going to select the networks that I want to participate in that VPN. I click apply, I'm done. I've now automated a site-to-site VPN deployment, which can take a lot of time if you're doing it from a traditional sense. As I mentioned earlier, security needs to be embedded in the network. And the way we treat security from a Meraki perspective is we treat it as an architecture. It's not a single box that provides security. We want security to exist across the whole platform. And this is really important because it starts with how we build our cloud infrastructure. That's secure from the ground up, and all the devices securely connect back into Meraki Cloud for their configuration and updates. But it also extends beyond that. With Meraki, we can push a group policy. That group policy might be per user, it could be per group, and that allows us to define what we want that user to have access to. It could even define things like traffic shaping as an example. On the SD-WAN side, we have full UTM capabilities, which include things like IPS and advanced malware. And really key to our security story is the integration we have with the Cisco portfolio, specifically with products like Umbrella to provide DNS security, and also things like Identity Services Engine for 802.1x. And that's really, really cool because we're seeing now more people wanting to leverage those capabilities to provide much better and more granular security posture for their environment. So on that, let's have a look at a new feature called Adaptive Policy, which has just been launched for Cisco Meraki. Adaptive Policy is a change in the way that we traditionally define security. Normally, we would map a user to an IP address and say, that user has this IP address, and then we would define a security posture based on that IP address. But if the user moves networks, that IP address can change, and then we have to redefine our security policy again. Adaptive Policy takes a different approach. What we now do is we use a tag, an SGT or a scalable group tag, and we assign that to the identity of the user. So when the user logs onto the network, it's now assigned to their username or their group. Now, I can define a rule based on that identity. So an example, looking at this screen, is if I don't want my guests to talk to my IoT devices, then I simply deny that and the policy's done. And this shows intent-based networking in its purest form. It's about how we simplify that policy and put it into a way that allows us to quickly deploy it and understand the policy that's applied to the network. With that, let's take a look at a couple of security dashboard demos. Okay, back over to my screen here. Before, we deployed SD-WAN. Let's say we want to add some security to SD-WAN. It's really easy for me to go into this threat protection screen here and enable advanced malware protection and IPS. I can choose for IPS what type of rule set I want. If I want a balanced or a security rule set. For this example, I'm going to apply a security rule set. I click apply and that's done. For this particular example, I'm going to enable advanced malware. I click enable for malware. For IPS, I'm going to enable that as well, and I'm going to choose from a security rule set perspective. I click save, and that's now applied. Okay, that's really cool. What if I'd like to also enable DNS security? Well, here I'm going to enable Umbrella with Meraki Cloud, and what's happening here is we're doing a direct API integration into Cisco Umbrella, which is allowing us to now link the policies between Umbrella and Meraki Dashboard. Okay, now, if I look in this box, I can see the policies I have from an Umbrella perspective. I'm going to choose the guest policy and I'm going to click save. So you can see in a few simple steps, I've now applied security posture to my SD-WAN environment. I've enabled advanced malware, IPS, and umbrella DNS protection for my clients. Now let's have a look at adaptive policy. So as I mentioned with adaptive policy, what's cool about this is defined at an organization level. So I've got all my groups in my environment and I can define these as I want. It's very easy for me to add a group here as an example. But you can see I've got some predefined ones, and what I want to now look at is the policy for these groups. An example being is I want to see what an employee can get access to. When I look at this, I realize, you know what? An employee probably shouldn't have access to the point of sale servers. So adaptive policy allows me to click that point of sale server, click deny, and now it's very easy for me to apply that policy and deny my employees from getting access to IoT. It's very simple, it's intent-based, and it's going to deploy to all the devices in my organization. How cool is that? Now let's talk about the feedback loop and what we call assurance. And what's key to assurance with Meraki is this is offered across the full Meraki stack today, whether that be on the endpoint with Systems Manager or using the native troubleshooting tools that I've mentioned within Dashboard to allow you to find problems in the environment, or even to see what data or what applications people are consuming. Meraki already provides assurance across the full stack. But new to this are two products that I'm going to talk about today. One is Wireless Health and the other is Meraki Insight. And they provide a very different lens into how we provide assurance on the Meraki side. So let's talk about Wireless Health. Wireless Health is assurance for Meraki Wireless. And what it aims to do is look at all of the devices that are connecting in on the wireless side, get an understanding of, are they having problems from an onboarding perspective? Are we seeing issues with things like DHCP or authentication? And if we are, we want Wireless Health to highlight that. And then what that allows us to do is allows us to pinpoint where the problem is in the network. We can also use Wireless Health to get a view of latency across the environment. So as an example, if my real-time voice queue looks like the latency is too high, I know that I'm going to be having voice issues on my site. Wireless Health now takes that a step further, where we're able to provide that end-to-end path that I showed you previously in my visibility demo, where you can see where that client is connected to in the environment and all those spots that they hop through the network. So we can identify if the issue is actually the access point or if it's at a switch downstream and we're seeing issues like packets dropping, as an example. So that's really cool. On the SD-WAN and security appliance side, we have Meraki Insight. And Meraki Insight provides two really valuable characteristics. The first is WAN Health. And this WAN Health is a view across the organization of all of your WAN links. Why this is key is that a lot of organizations today don't have this. They don't understand how their WAN is performing at any one point in time. They're not able to see if there's drops or if there's changes to latency and jitter on those WAN links. They also don't know when the service went unavailable or if it was available for all the times during the day. And this is critical because a WAN service impact could impact a number of users at a site. So WAN Health is really key to identifying which of those uplinks are problems and need solving. Meraki Insight also offers Application Health. And Application Health is also about looking at end-to-end, but this time it's about focusing on the application, specifically SaaS. Insight for Application Health allows us to look at an application that a user is using, and with deep packet inspection, we see that application from the user all the way into the cloud. We're able to track if that packet has had any issues on the LAN side, if it's a WAN issue, if it's an actual application issue or something happening with the server in the cloud. And the key point about that is it allows us to really quickly and easily pinpoint where that issue occurs and then reduces our time to resolution for problems. Let's have a look at those three examples that I showed earlier, and I'll give you a dashboard demo of what they look like in real life. Let's start with Wireless Health. Immediately, we can see the wireless health of our particular network that we're looking at here, and this is Meraki Corporate Office in San Francisco. I can see how many failed connections, I can see average latency, and there's some other information here where I can see APs that might be problematic. I can also get a view across all of the networks around how people are being able or how people are onboarding onto the network. Am I seeing issues with authentication? Am I seeing issues with DHCP? In this example, I'm actually seeing authentication issues, which is not uncommon in our corporate environment as it's in the middle of the CBD. We often get people connecting to the network and just trying to put in random usernames and passwords. But what's key here is that this view allows us to filter if we want. So we could look at specific SSIDs. We could also change the time frame that we're looking at. So if we see a problem in our environment, it's very easy for us to go back and look retrospectively and see how we can fix that fault. As I mentioned, we're also able to represent latency. And you'll see here that we break it up into traffic types. So I get a great understanding immediately if my voice traffic is being impacted. And if it is, I can scroll down and see, is it an AP that has that latency or is it a specific client as an example? I can also configure alerts in here. So it's really quickly to add an alert to say, send me something if I'm seeing failures in the magnitude of 20% for DHCP or DNS for 30 minutes. Click apply, I'll now get an alert if I see that in my environment. So now proactively we can alert you that there is an issue where otherwise you might have to wait for a user to call up and speak to the service desk before you were aware of that. Let's have a quick look at WAN health. Again, as I mentioned, WAN health is really key because we can get a view of the WAN links across the environment. And not just one WAN link. If you're using an MX appliance and you've got two WAN links connected for SD-WAN, we get a view of both. And we can see things like total usage. Once again, we can select what we're viewing for, what data we're viewing and what period we're viewing that data for. Or we can see total usage, things like average throughput and loss and latency. So we can understand that if a link has gone bad, we know when it went bad and we can have a look at that data. On the web app health front, we can also get this view end-to-end across that environment. And this is also with Meraki Insight. So you can see here I've got an example where this server is reporting an issue on the WAN and server side. If I click into that, I can see the specific site affected. So this view here is again across the organization that we're looking at. Now if I click into this specific site, I can immediately see here that there's a slow server that's been detected. If I look on my network graph, I can see some parts of red over here, which indicate that this application has fallen behind the performance threshold baseline that Meraki Insight has automatically enabled for me. If I look at that on the WAN side, I see the same thing here. Parts of orange where I can see that that specific HTTP response time has fallen below what's an acceptable threshold. Well, let's take a little bit closer look at the server. I can see this particular server here has a response time of 4.5 seconds. So as per that alert, that's something that I need to look at or log to the appropriate team, especially if that's an internal resource. Lastly, I want to touch on Cisco DNA Center integration. And this is key for a lot of customers, especially customers that are operating mixed environments that have Catalyst and Meraki today, and they want to understand how they can manage both of those platforms moving forward. What's cool is there's been a significant amount of work invested in DNA Center. Starting from 1.1, we bought Meraki devices in using the Meraki API. And this was cool because what that meant was that we could see Meraki devices as part of the inventory. And this was all API driven. As part of that intent-based networking, we're leveraging APIs to bring together two disparate different environments. In version 1.2, we enabled things like combined topology and mapping for hybrid environments. So if you had Catalyst switching and Meraki APs, you would see them in a combined topology view, which is really neat. Just recently released in 1.3.3, we now have SSID provisioning, which allows you to provision an SSID from DNA Center across both Cisco Catalyst and Cisco Meraki access points. And I'm going to show you a little bit more detail on that in a second. Moving forward, the idea is to enable more value in DNA Center, and that's by feeding things like wireless health data into wireless assurance in DNA Center so that we can see that across a common platform for both environments. Cisco DNA Center provisioning for SSID provisioning is really neat because this is part of that intent-based networking message that I spoke about earlier. It gives us a common platform, DNA Center, to essentially provision an SSID, and we do this really simply. We basically ask some key criteria for you to define a wireless network, and then we deploy Cisco best practices on both the Cisco Catalyst and Cisco Meraki portfolio, which means that you have a consistent experience across sites. So a user accessing wireless in your corporate environment who then goes out to a branch site that's running Meraki just simply connects to the wireless and they don't know any different. And so that's really cool and a recent feature enabled in DNA Center 1.3.3. Finally, I just want to go over a summary of what I presented to you today. We spoke about intent-based networking and the journey from what I saw 10 years ago when I was working as a network admin in the industry to how we've developed and enhanced intent-based networking today with products like Cisco Meraki and DNA Center. We also showcased the simplicity that Cisco Meraki offers in being able to take complex configuration and deploy that out to many networks. And that's really a key point of intent-based networking. We spoke about security as an architecture as part of that intent-based networking, how we embed security in our products. It's not an afterthought. It's something that needs to be there from an architectural approach. I also covered assurance and how we can use the data and the configuration that we've applied to the network to understand that that network is now operating as we intended to and running optimally. And last, I spoke about some exciting enhancements to DNA Center and also what's more to come on that front. Finally, I'd like to thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it, and we'll chat soon. Thank you.